While the developers of Kingsgrave are very clear about citing their inspirations, in this case the traditional old-school Zelda games, it's also a title that stands out on its own for a good variety of reasons. But is this action-adventure a game worth exploring for yourself, or should this king have stayed in his grave? Let's find out in our full review. But hey, don't you get stuck in the past with the dinosaurs of games media. Head on over to patreon.com/idreamofindiegames and you'll gain Discord access to the greatest indie gaming community, exclusive live streams, early ad-free shows, shoutouts at the end of every video we produce, and even free games depending on the tier you select. Your new indie gaming community is waiting for you. Kingsgrave is a top-down RPG that takes place within a bleak world which is now overrun by monsters. You play as a fallen king brought back to life by a spirit. And when I say spirit, I mean that literally. The character's name is shown as Spirit. This should give you a good idea of what you can expect out of Kingsgrave narratively. Almost nothing. You'll rebuild houses, take down enemies, and gather members together once more. The bits of dialogue that are here don't offer much insight into this world at all, so overall, if you were hoping for any sort of strong narrative within Kingsgrave, that's just not going to be the case here. What you will find, though, throughout this 10 to 15 hour adventure, depending on your skill level of course, is a massive overworld full of secrets, puzzles, and resources that you'll need to gather if you hope to restore things to how they were. While the developers may say that Kingsgrave was inspired by The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past is a game that they cite in particular, I didn't necessarily get that vibe completely outside of it being a top-down kind of retro-looking RPG, with the combat being somewhat like a traditional Zelda game. This does have a feel of its own though. There's not really dungeons to go through here. There's one big overworld that you'll explore. This makes Kingsgrave pretty open-ended to how you want to approach it. You can really go off in any direction, but you'll discover the more that you explore, the more you need to unlock, whether that be gathering resources, which build up homes, which you can then purchase new weapons or items from, or finding and gathering villagers who lost their way across this sprawling map. This is really a pretty grindy experience that's all about gathering, and unlocking the next thing in order to progress to certain areas or regions of the map. There's not a lot of direction given to players here, so if you like your games a bit more on the linear side, you're probably going to get frustrated with Kingsgrave. I certainly did at times, but if you love open exploration, there's quite a bit to like here. There's a lot of mechanics to dive into here, but let's start with the combat, which is fairly basic compared to everything else. In Kingsgrave, you're going to encounter a lot of different enemies across this open world. Some of them will simply come at you, some of them will spit bullets your way, but they all have unique patterns and ways to be dealt with. You have a good variety of weapons, some of which need to be unlocked, to either fight enemies from a distance, say you're using your spear, or you can bat them with your staff. All of your weapons can also be upgraded individually, and you can respec things as well. It's not my favorite combat system, feels a little stiff, but it does open up a bit the more that you unlock in the game. You'll even earn magic at one point, but overall the combat is just nothing special or remarkable here, and the enemies can dish out a lot of damage, so some of the encounters were downright frustrating at times. The second big component of Kingsgrave is the building element. As you traverse the world, you'll come across a lot of crumbled buildings that need your help, and can be restored with resources that you've gathered from really just smashing barrels, that kind of thing. You'll eventually be able to mine for resources as well, and once you build up certain homes, you can trade life essence, which is gathered off of defeated foes, to gain even more resources to build the next building. This gameplay loop is essential ultimately to being able to complete Kingsgrave, because some of the weapons that you need to unlock, which are also built through resources, are necessary to unlock paths. I'll give you an example. To get to the right side of the map, I needed an axe to chop down bushes that were in my way, and that seemed to be the only way to remove them initially. It can be annoying at times to be short on a certain resource, but thankfully there are torches across the map that act as waypoints. You can travel between them. There's a pretty good fast travel system here that makes bouncing around relatively easy. The last major part of the game is the puzzle solving. Across the world, there are various puzzles for you to solve. A lot of them involve grabbing blocks and manipulating them and putting them into the right area, that kind of thing. Nothing too perplexing here, but my problem with the core gameplay loop of Kingsgrave was the fact that I just seemed to hit dead end after dead end after dead end, and yeah, I would eventually figure things out, but it was a lot of wandering in between. There's just not enough direction for me Personally, I'm not saying the game has to hold my hand, and you can eventually figure things out, but I feel like a lot of time was wasted. For example, to mine, which is important to unlock the sword, which is pretty necessary to complete the game, you had to find this one little area on the map, and it's very easy to bypass it over and over again, and just be completely lost for up to an hour at times, just not knowing exactly where you need to go next. And that kind of stinks. That really kind of kills the flow of this game. Kingsgrave also doesn't feature a traditional leveling system. You can gain attribute points, you can eventually unlock things the way you want to, and you also find health upgrades that are hidden across the map like everything else in the game, so it's a matter of stumbling across them, though I will say that the map does a pretty good job of letting you know what you've already collected and what you haven't. There's an X mark next to things that you haven't yet unlocked, and there's a green check mark when you have, which is pretty handy. So overall, in terms of gameplay, I felt kind of mixed on Kingsgrave. You have this just ho-hum battle system that's nothing special. The exploration is fun, but can be pretty frustrating. You can get lost quite easily. And the puzzles are actually fairly clever and well designed, but again, it's a matter of finding them and knowing where to go next. The lack of direction just really kills this game at times. As far as visuals are concerned, Kingsgrave will not win any awards, but it's a nice pixel style. The game actually is quite dark, as I mentioned at the top of this review. There's not really a lot of sunshine and rainbows in this one. Pretty bleak setting overall. Not a lot of variety to the landscape, a lot of dark swampy areas. There's a desert here or there, that kind of thing. But overall, you're going to be exploring a lot of similar looking terrain throughout this campaign. Performance, it was also a little bit of a mixed bag. The game generally ran pretty well on my PC. I'd say there were some skips here or there though. Every now and then the game would just jump frames for whatever reason. Overall, not a terrible experience, but that was worth mentioning. And then on the Steam Deck, you're not getting a locked 60 here. It was more in the 38, bouncing around the 40 territory, which felt a little uneven to me, and the game already has a fairly slow pace, so not my preferred way of playing, unfortunately. Not my favorite game to play on Steam Deck. It looks sharp enough, though. As far as the soundtrack is concerned, however, it is quite good and the sound design excellent. I had some headphones on while playing, and there's a lot of good crisp sound effects, very crunchy stuff here, with the soundtrack kind of resembling an episode of Game of Thrones or something medieval like that with a dark tone. Surprisingly high production value behind the soundtrack, so good stuff there. Kingsgrave is a game that ultimately left me feeling pretty mixed and kind of confused how I even want to score it. On one hand, the combat system is not really all that engaging or fun, but it does improve over time. The more skills you unlock, your dash gets a little better, you learn magic, that kind of thing. So this is a game that is a very slow burn to get to some of the better elements of it. In general, the exploration, I felt much the same. Kind of a drag at times, a lot of stumbling and bumbling about for sure, but there are some rewarding moments in the exploration as well, and same goes for the puzzles. The graphics aren't going to amaze anyone, and the sound design is really good, so you just have this sort of up and down situation here. I think ultimately there's enough to say that Kingsgrave is at least worth the bronze Genie Lamp of approval. It's a pretty good game, it just makes a lot of decisions that didn't really work for me. I would say check this one out if you like open exploration, you're willing to deal with some of that, you don't really care about story in your games at all, you won't get any type of narrative here worth caring about. But if you were hoping for a true Zelda-style experience with a compelling narrative, set up dungeons, that kind of stuff, that's just not really what Kingsgrave is all about. So, pretty good game here, but Josh, I just feel mixed.